Okay, great. Thank you all for joining. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Some admin first. Please take a moment to make sure that you are muted and have the Zoom call set to speaker mode. You can find that in the top right under view. And we'll have some time at the end of this conversation to open it up for Q&A. So everyone think about what questions you have for our wonderful panelists. First, we're thrilled to kick off this new series with you today, In Situ. With every collection we're going to be releasing on Tonic, we'll be giving you a sneak peek into someone's home so that you can see how they are living with generative art. I'm Susanna Maybank, CEO and co-founder of Tonic, an art NFT platform offering the very best of generative and digital art to crypto and non-crypto natives. We built Tonic really to bridge the digital and physical worlds, and we are offering physical derivatives so that you can enjoy digital art in your home with every NFT that you purchase. We're also really prioritizing easy onboarding and making it as simple as possible for non-crypto natives to participate in this market. We offer credit card purchasing and provisional wallets, so anyone who shows up at the day of the auction can participate. We will be doing many more of these events, both in person and digital, so that everyone has a chance to join the conversation. We think that it's such a wonderful space. It's such a wonderful community to give people the chance to meet the artists, to speak to other collectors. That's something that's really special about Web3, and it's something that we're really prioritizing here at Tonic. So I'll turn it over to Miriam, my co-founder, to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Miriam. We are at my house in San Francisco because the power is out in the Presidio where our office is. We started this business, I think, really because we loved collecting. We loved the art that was being created, the creativity, the artist community. And I personally have really enjoyed the transparency that the blockchain provides around data. And the ability to understand what's happening. So actually, oddly and ironically, despite what everyone says about crypto, I found as a collector that I get a lot more information about blockchain-based art than I do about not blockchain-based art. I can find a lot of information. So more on that later, but excited to be here.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We also today have joining us Stefano Contiero, who is the artist of the upcoming Intimità collection that releases on Thursday, the 23rd of February at 10 a.m. PT, 1 p.m. ET. So very excited to have him here. We also have really legendary collector, JDH, on the call. Thank you for joining us. We'll be hearing more about his collecting experience in the NFT space. And then Kirsten Wolf, who is also a very, very experienced collector in her own right, but much more experienced in the traditional side. So really excited to see into her home and how generative and digitally native art is interacting with her collection.
And Kirsten was a former board member at SF Camerawork for many years. Introduced me to many photographic masters.
Okay, perfect. So if everyone could just do a quick round of introductions. For many of the audience members will be familiar, but just a quick hello and what got you interested in generative art or collecting in general. You can start with Stefano. Oh, Stefano, you appear to be muted. Let me try to see if I can unmute you.
Yes, I guess now I'm muted. Hi, everyone. I'm Stefano Contiero, generative artist. I guess my passion for code and visual art kind of brought me to generative art. Started around 4 years ago, kind of randomly. One day I picked up a book and I'm like, okay, let me try this. As soon as I tried, I kind of became hooked with the practice of generative art, fell in love, became my main passion. Started doing that for myself mainly. And at the end of 2020, I started sharing my work and kind of became part of the NFT waves with art blogs and kind of became a full-time artist right after. And happy to be here, happy to launch my collection with Tonic. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here.
Great. And Josh?
Hey, everybody. I'm collector JDH. You can snoop my collection via OpenSea if you like. There are a few really nice pieces from Stefano, among others. And I've liked art for a long time, but it really hit the intersection with crypto and NFTs and technology. My career's been in the technology arena, and just this idea that these artists paint with code, and that the generation machine is the code that they write. That as a art collector, I'm a little tiny participant in the process, in the minting. I help provide the random seed that generates the specific work. I love the idea that I'm a collector of an edition with many other people and sort of a club with me, yet we all have our own one-of-ones typically in a lot of the generative collections. Really speaks to me. And so it's really, and then, I like crypto generally. And so all these things kind of came together. And so I'm a much bigger art collector now with NFTs, I guess, than I was before NFTs. And I was, fairly early in art blocks. I was minting squiggles, among other things, when that thing kicked off, and it really spoke to me. So I've got a couple of complete curated sets through from the art blocks from the first, I guess, 8 seasons, and which includes Stefano's work and then a number of other things. Bright Moments, own a fair amount of Bright Moments, which I know Stefano has also participated with, and excited with what he's doing with you here to progress the work.
Thank you so much. It's definitely something that I've heard not infrequently, that people became much larger or more active collectors after discovering generative art and NFTs. So it's interesting to see how appealing this market is to people who are a little hesitant to participate in the traditional market. Kirsten.
So I am a generative art newbie, and I've been collecting photography for over 30 years. I think I was a thwarted photographer myself, and developed a better eye than ability to take images. And I've collected really everything from very well-known, very established artists to very young student work at times. It's really what speaks to me. And I think part of the reason why I'm really interested in generative art is the sense of photography, this constant questioning over the years of, is photography considered art, fine art, or is it technology, or is it somewhere in between? And I feel like that conversation then got reignited with the rise of, or the ubiquity of photos that you can take on an iPhone. And I feel like some of those conversations are happening surrounding generative art. And so it's really this interesting new frontier that many of you have already jumped kind of with both feet into, and I'm tiptoeing maybe a little bit, but I'm really fascinated by, again, the fact that Tonic is also kind of playing to people in more in my camp, that there's actually objects as well as in addition to the technological aspect. So.
Thank you so much. Stefano, with that, maybe we can turn to you and talk a little bit about the collection, how it came to be, and how you're thinking about the physical print offering in conjunction with this work.
Sure. So Intimità, it's a work that builds on top of a sketch I created in early 2022. Kind of was re-elaborated to include a lot of experience I've made during this year, a lot of the traveling, a lot of the people I met. The inspiration, which usually comes after the works, I try to just remove myself, just usually I have a vision of which is very detailed, very visual. Just sit down in front of the computer and start writing code and do whatever I feel like doing. And once I have the perception that the work is finished, I step back and try to analyze why I created what I created. So the retrofitting inspiration, it's all about intimacy, how we build intimacy with all the people, and usually it's built between two people, and has a process which every relationship is very unique, very detailed, very kind of complex, and usually we can relate to that as taking away layers or adding more layers of our personality and kind of removing this layer of our own onions to show our true version of ourselves. And it's very unique to the relationship of those two people. You can see that in the work where you have a lot of different texture, a lot of different layers, but also it almost, I think Annie was saying it reminded her of stripping down a wall, which is another metaphor of when you're getting to know somebody. Usually you have these walls that you tear apart the more time you spend with the person, the more you experience with that person. Very colorful, very alive. And to answer your question about how I feel about prints, most of the time I start my work always with a wall in mind, always in the physical space. It's very important to me to visualize the end result on a physical kind of space, because with screens, sometimes it's very hard to perceive the nature or the soul of an artwork, if you ask me. And what I kind of struggle with screens sometimes is like screens shoot light at you, meanwhile paper or anything physical reflects light at you. So I feel art most of the time when it's in a physical form has even additional layers depending on where you position the physical, what time you look at the physical, the light surrounding the work and so on, which has always inspired me and made me thought about how art becomes even more unique and even more personal depending the context where you put the work.
This collection, we offer prints from 12 by 16 to 72 by 56 inches. That is a huge range of sizes. How are you thinking? Have you ever printed anything at this scale? And how are you thinking about?
Almost, I think this is actually the largest one by Aria. Maybe once I printed something that was wider, but for sure shorter on the other side. And I'm very curious. I haven't yet seen the prints of Intimità. I'm very curious to see how they are, because probably it's one of my most detailed work ever. So I guess I will discover very soon.
I feel a bit unfair because we're actually sitting next to one of the largest prints right here on the call. We'll be showing people a bit later. But I can tell you the detail is incredible. It's something that you can't necessarily see on the smaller preview images, but it is a pointillist work. Have you ever worked with pointillism before? And why did you decide to employ it in this collection?
So I have worked with pointillism before. I think this is the first work which is very noticeable. Most of the time, all my works reduced to using very simple shape and repetition of those simple shapes. Usually it's rectangles or circles. In this particular work, I decided to kind of enhance and make that effect even more visible, especially given that if you look closely, the colors kind of shift from point to point, but also it has some kind of every other points, there's a different colors. So whether you perceive everything's just one color, it's actually a myriad of color mixed together to create additional depth and kind of more an effect of materiality.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Stefano. I would love to turn to JDH now and ask a bit of your experience collecting. I know, had you collected art prior to blockchain art? Oh, yeah. Okay, we are having yet another. You should be okay now.
Sorry, yeah, I muted myself because there's a background noise. I'm not sure if it was me. It's very dramatic for anyone else. I feel like there's a dramatic soundtrack going on. Just my end, I guess. Do I sound okay? Okay.
Yeah, you sound great.
So I'm sorry, I got distracted by the
No
technical.
problem.
Your question?
Had you collected art prior to art on blockchain?
Yeah, I remember, Miriam and I have been friends for a long time. I remember going to her previous house, or one of her previous houses, where she had just really beautiful and dramatic artwork, and was being very inspired by it. And at that time, I'd maybe had a little bit, but not not much. And it really, that and other things got me the bug to collecting stuff, just because just having that beauty in the physical environment around me, and just to be in some cases challenged or inspired or calmed by works is just really powerful. And the other thing that I focused on when my wife and I were buying art previously before NFTs, I really focused on a lot of local artists. Most of the art we have in the house is from California, a lot of it from the Bay Area where I live. And part of that is just feeling in community with the artists, to some extent. I mean, but on the other hand, not really in a lot of ways, because it's you don't really, maybe you get a bit of interaction with them. And that's been just a real unlock in collecting NFTs, is a lot of the artists will really be in community with you, and other collectors will be in community with you, and you can kind of geek out on the art and what it means to you with other people, and interact with the creator and understand their vision more. And so, in collecting some art before NFTs, I enjoyed that as well. So, and this has just really unlocked a lot more of that.
Do you, as someone who does find value in hanging things on their wall and having that added utility, have you printed or gotten physical forms of some of your collection?
I sure have. It really does bring it home. I mean, not every piece is so suitable to it, right? But some pieces are really suitable to it. So you see behind, can you guys see the screen? Yeah, my selfie. So that's running Leo Villarreal's Cosmic Reef, which is Leo is a artist who has done a lot with light, including the new Bay Bridge in the Bay Area, or not so new Bay Bridge has a giant light display, and the bridges over the River Thames he's done. And he did this generative drop, and this is a movie of that. And that, I don't think for the most part, I think doing a still image of that would not do it justice. But then there is a lot of art that it will do it justice. And even let me see if I can, I guess it's a little hard to share here, but even in this room, I'll show you a couple of things if you'll give me a little bit of patience. I just had this printed. This is from Entre Tiempos, which is a project on art blocks. And so you see a physical rendition of that, and you're not going to be able to really see it, but there's just a ton of texture and layering in the color on this that is just really spectacular in person. Actually, I just picked this up today. So that's an example of rendering. And then this is quite large, but I printed a ringer. This is a bullseye ringer from another artist, Dmitry Cherniak, had this collection of ringers. And, I really love them. I have a lot of them, but I was able to print this one on this 5-foot square piece of hardwood plywood. Dmitry rendered it transparent in the background, so you get to see a lot of the texture, coming through on that. And so that's another example of rendering. And to your point, rendering large, that really has an impact, having the scale. I'm sure these in-person works, when you're rendering Stefano's new drop, at large scale, it's very powerful. So I've also rendered a large Fidenza. So I do have some physical, and then some artists do combo physical. You see, these are rockets by Tom Sachs, and this was a project that had both an NFT and a physical rocket he created and actually launched and retrieved and so forth. So yeah, having it in the physical world is really meaningful to me. Definitely.
Where do you see, you've been in the space for a while, I mean, relatively speaking, for generative art. Where do you see generative art in the market going next? What is the future?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, to me, this, within the entire spectrum of NFTs, right? Generative is just a subset, a niche at some level, even though it's doing quite well. But to me, it speaks to me so much because if you take non-generative NFT art, if somebody draws something really cool, maybe they use Illustrator or Paint or something and make something really cool. The NFT-ness of it is mostly taking a signature of that work and recording it on the blockchain. And that's really cool. Right now, you've got this provenance, this history and clear ownership and title, and scarcity. You know who really owns it, which is difficult with a digital image. But the fact that the thing generative unlocks for me, where the artist is a coder and you're building this large set, it just feels like really powerful. And so to me, it's more exciting. That surprise of unwrapping what you get, when you mint, is really thrilling. The variety, seeing all the variety that comes out in the different works that are all related to each other, but each unique, is pretty exciting. And it really gives a role as an individual to be a curator at some level. You can pull together sets, you can do it with your own, but you can actually just do it as a fan and curate sets because everyone can share the entire collection. You could pull things together in a way that you think things look good together or play off of each other. So, where do I see it going? Well, I see, efforts like you're undertaking to get physicals out to people. I think that's really going to broaden the market and really deeply connect people to the work that they're buying. I think that's going to be very powerful. I do think we'll get more advanced communities of these users together, so that they can more easily communicate with each other and the artists. And I think that people are going to get more and more satisfaction out of it. You'll be able to, for example, token gate communities, so that only you can have like a private community only for people who own a certain work. That kind of thing will become easier. You can sort of do it now, but it's not necessarily so easy. I think we'll see advances in display technology. I mean, I know some of Stefano's work. I'm looking at one of my pieces here of a previous drop of his, the Infinito drop. That has great motion with it. It would look really cool printed and still, but it would also be very powerful in a display setting. And so, I think we'll get better and better ways to do that display. And I think so. Those are some of the things that I see coming down the pike.
And Josh, how you now, when you look back at what's transpired since early 21, or let's say late 2020, you've built a collection that's possibly one of the biggest in the world, is what I think I understand.
Big anyway, yeah.
I would ask, the last time I checked, at least, it was one of the, possibly a handful of the biggest NFT collections in the world based on value. And I'm wondering what you think comes next in terms of credibility for this space. Can you talk about, we've just seen a big donation to the LACMA, right? What else do you imagine is happening from?
And the Center Pompidou also. I think those are the two most established museums that I've seen that have announced collecting NFT works in their permanent collection. I think that's a big sea change, right? As I've spoken through you and with other people to various people involved with, leading museums in the NFT space. And I think they've been reluctant to collect NFTs because they don't understand it. I think a lot of them have an outdated mindset around the energy use of NFTs. They don't really understand it, but they've read some article. They don't understand anything about proof of stake and the transition to the fact that most of these NFTs, which are on Ethereum, are now fairly de minimis. The network they're on is fairly de minimis in terms of energy usage. But I think in a lot of cases, they're a little fear of being, they don't want to be first movers. They don't want to look dumb. A bunch of this NFT stuff, Bored Apes or whatever, you end up looking, pudgy penguins or something. Like the associations are a fairly lowbrow, and this stuff is, even what I think of as really good art is like 2 years old here, a lot of it, right? And so
2 years,
it just feels risky. And a lot of these people, like, they're not founders, their employees, you know, they don't want to lose their job, right? If they start collecting NFTs and then it ends up being, you know, a laughing stock, they don't. So I think a lot of the museums have been taking their time, not feeling like they needed to move quickly. But now that LACMA and Pompidou have collected, I think that is going to give a lot of cover to other museums to, you know, it's just social proof, right? It's not just me. And, you know, a number of big collectors of traditional art have moved in and begun to collect some really good NFTs.
Yeah.
And so I do think that legitimizes the space. I mean, at some level, I don't care, right? Like, you know, some crusty old guy, you know, doesn't like NFTs, you know, even though he's collected, you know, for 50 years, it's fine. But it's cool at museums. And I guess the thing I would react to on the LACMA thing that's interesting, and I've talked to Kozomo, who did that donation, and it's, you know, it was non-trivial thing to donate to the museum. It's like they don't just take it. You can't, you know, it wasn't that it was hard to find someone who would donate NFTs to LACMA. It was hard to find a leading museum who was willing to collect these things, actually. And so I think it's a big deal.
Yeah. And when you know, when I think about you were the one who actually introduced me into the space in early 2021. I think we just locked down the pandemic, and you were like, you know, Mariam, you should really look at these squiggles I've been buying. And I was onboarding, admittedly a little too slowly, but you know, come to find the next summer, I was in London in the Phillips Gallery, and everything that I had bought was actually on the wall, you know, a year later, right? Monica was, I think maybe it was Monica, it was Matt Delorier. I think it was a Ringer's piece, Dimitri Cherniak, and looked around the wall, and everything that I had just bought a year earlier was already, you know, at a really prestigious gallery in London. So it's just to say that I think that the space has been moving quickly, but it still feels like you're kind of early to this movement, is what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's a lot to be discovered. There's a lot of new territory to explore for the artists here. You know, I think it's really in the early stages of what can be done. So it's not, you know, the idea of just the mere idea of generative art on the blockchain is now a couple years old, but that's just one tiny nugget of like the whole puzzle of what's going to be the design space that's going to be explored here.
Josh, if you were a great investor, at least that's what everyone says. All of us say behind your back. I think talking about it today with someone who was like, he's a great investor. If you had to look a year in advance, I'm sorry to ask you this, but what's in your crystal ball a year from now with regards to this space? Like, what do you imagine potentially happening in early 24?
Oh gosh, I think that's a really interesting question. I think, you know, I think generative art is going to continue to be very strong on a relative basis to one-of-one art or the other areas in the NFT space. You know, I'm keen to see what continues to come. And to me, if we do look back on this as like a meaningful historical movement within the broader art world, I think that's possible. I don't think that's certain, but it's possible that 10, 20 years from now, this will be considered you know, a really meaningful development within the broader art world. If that happens, you know, my best guess is it would be the generative art portion of it. You know, it's not as cool as an X copy one-of-one is, and it's very cool. To me, the generative art is just a bigger mental shift. It's a more dynamic change. It's, you know, making the artists, the coders, it just feels so 21st century to me that the artist is now someone who writes code instead of using a paintbrush or dragging a digital paintbrush across a digital canvas and a digital art app. You know, it just, I mean, I don't think that's the only thing, but I think this generative subsegment could be very strong. And so I think, you know, we'll see a lot of different things. I mean, one thing that is counterintuitive from an investor standpoint to me is that it's not clear at all that small collection sizes driving rarity is what drives value as a collector. That would be like a piece of like interesting insight to me, is that a number of collections, you see within generative art, generally collection sizes somewhere between 100 and 10,000. There are exceptions, but I would say that the line, I don't know, Stefano would agree, but that's the lion's share of what I see. And on a per piece basis, collectors will talk about what they say is the floor, or what is the least valuable piece in one of these collections. There might be 100 or 1,000 pieces. Sometimes they're all valued similarly. It's just a matter of taste, but there's nothing particularly different. But in some collections, certain outputs are regarded as superior or more desirable for various reasons. But if we talk about the floor, which is, we think about in the collections, well, what's the least valuable piece worth? The floor price for the large collections is not lower, and in fact is often higher than the floor price for smaller collections. So you would have thought a collection of 100, or I would have thought, that a collection of 100 would have fewer pieces. They would thus be more rare and thus more valuable if they're of equivalent quality and an equivalent provenance and equivalently good artist. But that doesn't seem to be true. There's something about the larger collections getting a larger base of owners, which means they interact with it more, they talk about it more, it gets more mind share and awareness in the community. Its usefulness as a symbolic membership with a group of other like-minded individuals is more useful because it's a bigger group. I mean, it's not exclusively a rule, but it's just surprising that a lot of it's, a 10,000 collection like Squiggles. I mean, Squiggles is one of a kind. It's the first project on Art Blocks, but a 10,000 piece collection would sit at like a 15 ETH floor, which is in the top, probably top 5% of Art Blocks projects, even though it is much larger than the other collections. And similarly, some other large collections do well. So that might be one thing to think going forward. You would think as an investor, I would want to buy a small collection, a piece in a small, or as an artist, you might think I want to release a smaller collection. But surprisingly, counterintuitively to me, sometimes the larger collections are the places to look because they become a touchstone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Speaking of collections, one last question before we move on to Kirsten. What are you excited about with Stefano's upcoming Intimità? You've seen some preview images in the collection description. How do you think about this collection?
Well, I think it's, from what I've seen in the previews, it looks fantastic. I think it's going to render in the physical world spectacularly. And I would say, the thing that strikes me as a progression from his other works that I've collected is sort of the organic nature, the naturalness of this style. I think is really compelling and stands out from some of the other works I've collected in his work. So of his work, some of the other pieces, like if I look at I found the noise. It's driving me crazy. It was, it was the background. It was the music from one of your pieces was playing, but it was very dramatic. Made my whole experience very dramatic. I just moved off that.
We couldn't hear it at all. So it was just over your place.
Yeah. Okay. That was my Infinito piece, like playing music in the background very dramatically. But if I look at Fermenti, which is, I think your first Art Blocks drop, is that right? Yeah, Art Blocks curated drop. That's fairly geometric, very sharp lines, like clear. And then even if I look at Legenda, how do I say it? I'm not saying Legenda, which by the way is a great value. There are a few pieces for sale at very attractive prices for people who want to get into his work, and some of those are very beautiful. Again, it feels very digital in a way because it's like polygons to some degree or strong lines, and then here we have something that has a feel of as I look at some of these works in this drop, another Tonic artist, William Apon's anti-cyclone project, some of those most of those are pieced up into smaller grid-like smaller chunks, but a couple of those are scaled where it's not pieced into the grid, and there's a little bit of that feel, which is very, that project is done. People are very passionate about that project. It's done very well. And to me, I see some of that and even more in this, in the rich colors and the organic shapes, and it and with the puntillist, design also, it's one of these things that's going to look incredible from a distance. And up close, being able to get that perspective on it, I guess being like Ferris Bueller at the Art Institute of Chicago, looking at the Surratt, you see it from afar, you see it from close. And here, you're just gonna, it's very powerful when you stand back from it, but then you get very close and you inspect all the details of it. It's really compelling. So I'm pretty excited with this.
We're sitting right next to it and keep looking over as you're speaking, and the intricacy of the detail in every square inch of this piece, and we have it blown up in this massive sheet here, is it's astounding.
Well, I don't know if people, obviously Stefano can talk more about the technical details of this, but it's sort of a vector design, right? So you could scale this up and at very high resolution. When you scale it to a very large size, you're still going to have perfect resolution of it. And so it allows you to have I'm sure it'll look great small too. Not everybody has the wall space to hang, something huge. It'll look great on both, but you just, the bigger it gets, the more it's going to unleash.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably one of the very first time I get to use my full spectrum of techniques and release a project. Just to give you like time range, usually the average piece for Intimità takes like 15 minutes to generate, which is why it wouldn't be suitable for art blocks, because it would probably crash your browser.
Yeah.
And, meanwhile, given that all of these are pre-generated, we could leverage way more texture, way more details that wouldn't be otherwise possible on a regular browser.
And still
Amazing.
probably slowed your computer down hugely. Thank you for all of that.
Yeah, thanks for transferring those huge files to us.
Yeah, really. I think the high resolution images are 1.5 gigabytes or something. Absolutely.
Yes, I'm actually generating those in the background.
Oh my goodness, that's massive.
They're massive.
They're huge, yeah. We had to just try to figure out how to get the images to us for printing was a bit of a headache. It's a thing. It came over physically.
Yeah, luckily Stefano is also in San Francisco, so we can do a hard drive handoff. Old school.
And this quality of the printing and having you guys take care of that, so that you're just going to get the right paper, it's going to look how the artist wants it to look. Because if you go to print these things, like I say, you're choosing between, do I want bright white paper, or do I want, how much of a texture do you want in the paper? And here I assume you guys have collaborated to express exactly what the vision is here for it. So that's great.
If you can outsource all of those decision making to us, we'll take care of that. Don't worry. And then Kirsten, thank you so much. We would love to start just hearing a bit about how you got into collecting and what you're drawn to.
Sure. Yeah. So, it was really interesting actually listening to Josh speak, because although some of the terminology is different from the way that I would describe what I do, some of the kind of underlying principles are similar. And so, Josh, when you were talking about creating sets or kind of this curatorial aspect that you employ as do other NFT collectors, I would say that I do that in both a macrocosm, but also in a microcosm. And so as I was looking to place Stefano's piece, I actually landed on my living room. So again, using this concept of a set. And as I was looking around my living room, and I can do a spin for all of you and look at some of the other pieces that I have here, some of the more traditional pieces, it was really interesting, because what I really noticed was the common theme amongst all of these pieces was really movement. And I really see so much movement in Stefano's piece. And really that is true with the pieces in the living room. So I'll kind of take you around a little bit. So here is Stefano's piece here on the mantle, and I'll get a little closer after I kind of do a little around the room. this piece behind me is a photograph by an artist. I'll come a little closer. Alejandro Cartagena, and it's called Carpoolers. And it's really a commentary on kind of housing and workers and how people are living in Mexico. This is in the town of Monterrey, so far from their places of employment. And so these workers are actually asleep in the back of a truck.
Wait,
It's illegal to do that.
where they're all shot from the bridge overhead?
Yeah,
that
exactly.
collection
Did you
is
see that?
fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing. And he had a really beautiful show at SF MoMA. Time with COVID got a little amorphous for me. So many years ago, a few years ago, some years ago. Over here, there's a piece by famous, very well-known French photographer, Cartier-Bresson. And this is a 1951 image called Queen Charlotte's Ball, which was a dance that they would put on in London. And again, the glare is a little funky, but again, the sense of movement and the swirl of the dresses reminds me so much, Stefano, of like some of the abrasions on your work. It's funny how these conversations happen, both with the artist and the actual subject, as well as the artist and the actual piece, if there is a piece, and then again with the collector and the images. So this one, let's see if I can get this. This is a very large photograph by Richard Misrock, who is an internationally recognized artist who we're very lucky because he happens to live in the Bay Area. And again, I'm sorry for the glare, but it's two figures in an ocean. Let's see if I can get up a little closer. And so the man is throwing the woman up in the air, like this really joyful kind of scene. But the interesting thing, and I've talked to him about this, is that I can't remember when this was taken, but the technology, like the arm is kind of in motion, so it's like it's not at a complete standstill, which again was reflective of the technology at the time. And so then I'm just moving over to Stefano's piece here. And so I think some of these things are really evocative in this piece as well, just the swirls of the different colors and kind of the blending. And to Josh's and Stefano's speaking of kind of this pointillistic aspect, like especially in the kind of beige tones, like actually almost looks like little sand, like pieces of sand that, I mean, it's really kind of incredible to think that this wasn't kind of your original kind of work, that this was actually a reflection of something that you created online. It's just kind of really amazing to think of. And I think it's, again, really beautifully printed with this like deckled edge and just, again, kind of the abrasions that you can see. They just look like they're done by hand, I think is what I'm trying to communicate. So I think that's it. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's lovely. And I wish we were there in person to see all the art. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. So I think now we do have a few questions that have come up in the chat and some that were sent over Discord. So anyone who's on the call now who has a question, please raise your hand. But we can get started first with some questions from Discord. Bidus asked, Stefano, how do you come up with your color palettes and at what stage do you think about color?
So I think now I have around 27 colored palettes that I always use in my work. I think probably for the first 3 years, 2 years and a half, I just, every work had its unique color palette. And at a certain point, what I do is usually every year I create a new kind of folder where I put all the year's work. And I said, for some reason, okay, let's try to stick always with the same color palettes. And from that time onwards, I started kind of using probably around 10, 15 palettes. And then the more I started releasing work, the more I started kind of expanding that color palette space up to today, where I try to not only release a work with all the color palettes, and that's probably something also influenced by collectors, because I noticed that a lot of collectors start favoriting like one specific color palette, and they start associating different works of mine with the same color palettes and creating like this beautiful composition. And every new work usually brings new color palettes, and probably the last 4 color palettes are inspired by people. It's a fun game that I usually, when I bond with somebody, I'm just like, hey, please send me a photo, your favorite photo, or a photo you took that you like, and I will extract a color palette from there. And funnily enough, I think the color palette that was more successful for you in Intimità was the Dirties palette, and Dirties is one of the community leader and beloved collectors from art blogs. And we met last year. We instantly kind of bonded, and now we are very, very good friends. So it makes me happy because he is also living in San Francisco and will get to attend the event and everything. And it's nice because it feels almost like there was a bit of co-creation in my work together with a collector, which speaks again about the community and the importance of the community in this space.
I had thought that that's who that was named after, but it's great to have confirmation.
So that means you've really made it as a Stefano friend. If there's
Yeah.
a color palette named
When there's-
after it. Well, no, we really
When there's a Susanna color palette, I'll know.
we'll have hit the bar.
Okay, another question from Bidus. This is for JDH. He wants to know how you think through your collection process and evaluating art. Do you acquire based on visceral feelings, or do you follow a more pragmatic process? How do you make the decision to buy?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think there's like a lot of different things. I guess in the pre-NFT world, you really had this binding constraint of physical space to hang art. So you didn't buy as much. I didn't buy as much art, but there's always room in my MetaMask wallet for another NFT. So you sort of lack that kind of constraint. Because I've spent a lot of my career as an investor, this art sort of sits somewhere between investing, collecting, and just sort of appreciating. And so I will buy different things for different reasons. So sometimes I will buy something because I think it's a good investment. Sometimes I will buy things just because I like it and I want to own it, or it makes me feel good. And those two things are diametrically different in terms of like the rational and the sort of intuitive, emotional side in terms of what I pick. So for example, one of the things I've learned as a pure investor in pieces over the last couple of years, as from a financial perspective, if collections have like a range of rarities, and unless you have some specific insight around something that is more rare that you think is going to be more valuable that the rest of the world doesn't know or whatever, you're just better off from an investor standpoint. If you like a collection, you think other people are going to like the collection, it'll become more valuable over time, you're better off buying at the floor, because there's always liquidity at the floor. There's not a lot of liquidity, even if you're right at the higher prices, and you have to find just the right buyer for a very specific piece that you think is rarer and more valuable, or more beautiful and more valuable. So as an investor, you always buy at the floor, but as a collector, I'm buying what I like, what speaks to me, and I'm not necessarily thinking about how well it's going to resell. And so in that case, I'm happy to pay well above the floor for something that I just like. I like the color palette better. It just speaks to me. I like how it's laid out, or just elements of it are just more resonant with me.
A bit of a follow-up question here from AB in the chat. What advice do you have for collectors just beginning in the NFT and generative art space?
Well, I guess it sort of depends on which of these motivations. And I do think I talked about two motivations: an investor motivation, sort of just an aesthetic appreciator of the items kind of motivation. There is sort of a third dynamic in here, which is sort of a collector motivation, which is slightly different, right? And so I mentioned earlier when I was introducing myself that I have two of these art blocks curated sets in the first 8 seasons. They called that like the first 8 seasons of art blocks, and the set is one of each of those pieces. Well, at some level, that's not really a financial transaction or necessarily an aesthetic transaction to collect that. It's like some weird collector brain thing that you want to have like a set of all these, like that has some meaning to you, and that's a different motivation as well. So I guess there are multiple different. So when asking a beginner collector, what I hear when I hear beginner collector is probably somebody on a budget, who doesn't want to just throw money around. A lot of these things are very expensive. So if you come to the insight that you really like some of Infinito, one of Stefano's good works. Well, if we look on look on OpenSea, the floor on that is many thousands of dollars, right? Like to get into that. And so as a new collector, it's a big bite. And I would say, so I'm making an assumption there. Maybe it's a very wealthy person who's a new collector and they're like, oh, that's no problem. But, if I would say you don't have to spend a lot of money to get really good art in the space, and you can go through and find stuff that speaks to you, and some of it'll be very well priced. And that's different from an investor standpoint, but that's from a collecting standpoint. For example, I mentioned that I really like these cosmic blooms, Leo Villarreal's work. I mean, he's a very well-known artist. He's collected at some very good museums, has a very good reputation. He had this art blocks drop. He recently had another drop called Cosmic Bloom. That's Cosmic Reef. It's similar in many ways, and it's very affordable. Very affordable. Depends on the perspective, but you can get into it for several $100s for a piece from it's a reasonable size collection from a very well-known artist. And so you really can find a lot of stuff for a few $100s with great art. So you could start there. You don't have to collect Tyler Hobbs Fidenzas, which are $100,000, for the least expensive one. You can find a lot of great art as a beginner. So I think that's right. I would troll through a lot of these collections I would look at these new drops from Tonic, obviously, because they're beautiful, and because Tonic is new on the radar, doesn't have the profile necessarily of art blocks and things yet. It may in time, but that could mean some pretty attractive having been early at art blocks, minting squiggles for $40 each, and then it, over time they became what it was. So that's an opportunity. And I think also just going through a lot of these existing collections, and there's some really great art at very affordable prices as a beginner. And I would start there. I've seen some collectors start and they want to come in and they're like, I need a squiggle and a ringer and a Fidenza, and now you're hundreds of thousands of dollars just when you're getting started. And I don't think you have to start that way.
Great. And from Kat, also in the chat, Stefano, what is a challenge of creating generative art versus physical art?
I guess it depends. Every medium has its own limitations. On top of my mind, creative generative art has the beauty that there are no rules, literally. You can mess up as many times as you want. You can always go back. You can always undo, redo, change, flip, and everything. Meanwhile, in the physical world, once you put the brush on the canvas, sometimes it's hard if you mess up to fix the work. On the other hand, of course, generative art, it's way more digital. And if you want to do something very specific, you need to face the limitation of what you can do with code, or to better say, the limitation of what how you can do something with code, which stuff sometimes is it's a curse and a blessing, because most of the time your vision, or at least for me, is very clear, and there might be some very magical mathematical formula to create exactly that effect, but it might not be so obvious. So you need either to learn, try and error to get to that point, or you need to find a workaround to create that effect. And what I usually do is just brute force the problem until I find something that's interesting for me, and then take it from there. But that leads to a lot of serendipity moments where maybe you're going down one path, but then a bug or something kind of change completely how the pieces look, and then you take a new direction. And at the end of the day, that's what drives me the most as well, because sometimes I start with something in mind, but then I mess up something, and something completely unexpected happens, which most of the time leads to be the most successful piece of the work. A very cool example is with Frammenti. Initially, Frammenti were, which are for the ones that haven't never seen them, pretty much some basic geometric shapes subdivided in many pieces. And they were supposed to be static, but then I forgot to stop the script, and there were some randomness that kind of made the pieces vibrate. And that led me to the fact, oh, maybe I can make this animated. And how I kind of envisioned that is Frammenti exploding. And when Frammenti was released back in the days, I did not announce the fact that they were exploding, and people discovered that by themselves after a while. And I guess it's still the most appreciated feature of the piece, that at a certain point, if you leave them there on the screen, they will just explode and start dancing for yourself. So it's the beauty of unpredictability in generative art.
Amazing. And one last question from the chat from Valerie. Kirsten, she's wondering how you think about incorporating different styles of artwork into your home. Do you rotate the pieces out regularly? Do you have some in storage? How do you make a broad range of art fit in a space that you live in?
So obviously for the big pieces, such as the misrack behind me, I mean, that's really large. It weighs a lot. And so that is not very movable, but a lot of the smaller pieces I do rotate around. I think it kind of, again, creates those different conversations in a really interesting way that I like to see. However, Josh, I am really admiring Leo's piece behind you, and I'm just thinking how much easier that would be. So
if you want to get into collecting a few reefs, hit me up. I'll give you good tips.
All right,
I think
sounds good.
it's really
Thank
cool.
You. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Leo's an interesting one, right? Josh, like I think I was at Fog and walked by a Leo piece that was maybe priced at, I don't know, $250,000, right?
Oh, yeah.
And maybe but it was beautiful. And the NFT floor right now for the two collections, what do you think? I mean,
Well, I think because Cosmic Reef is art blocks curated, it gets a little bit of a premium. I think that the collections there get a little bit of a premium. I think Leo's, when he talked about Cosmic Bloom, he felt like he was able to do some stuff that he much like Stefano said in his file size here, for example, things he couldn't do on Art Blocks engine. Leo said the same thing in interviews. I don't know Leo, I'm saying like we're friends or something, but like he said the same thing in some interviews, but he was able to do it with greater detail and with the Cosmic Bloom series. And you know, the Cosmic Bloom series has a floor of about $500 now, and it's about 3 times that for the Cosmic Reef series. And the thing with this collection is, to my eye, nearly all the pieces are great. You know, I showed you that print I did today of the Entre Tiempos, which I really love. But the thing with that collection is the least good pieces, in my opinion, aren't that good. Honestly, it's like stratified, and then there's a lot of really excellent ones. But there's a lot of consistency across these collections from Leo. And if I look at the Cosmic Blooms at the recent activity, you know, they've the last 3 that have sold for around $350 to $375, which is, I think, a pretty incredible entry price for work from his. And I've continued to buy a number of his works. If I look through, I'm looking at the recent sales on his, and even though I have, you know, more than I need, if I look at the last dozen sales, 5 of them were to me, because I've just put in a low bid order. You know, if people want to sell his work for $300, like, I'm just sort of like always in the market, right? I just think it's great. And from a collector standpoint, you know, I think from an investment standpoint, he's the type of artist that museums are going to want to collect. And I think about also these risk-averse museums who who are some of the people are a little bit afraid, if I take a new artist from NFTs, but if you're collecting Leo's work, or Tom Sachs' work, or whatever, right? Like, it's already in the collection. And so collecting their NFT is a smaller bridge. Collecting the NFT of an artist where you've already collected their physical work prior to NFTs, I think is a smaller step for these guys. And I think the work's great.
Okay, amazing. Thank you all for joining. We are over an hour at this point, so I'm going to let everyone get back to their day. But thank you, Kirsten, JDH, and Stefano, and Mariam as well for
Thank you,
coming.
guys.
Thanks
That was
everyone for
awesome.
joining.
Thank you. See you
So
soon.
much.
More to come.
Yes.
Bye.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.